Hello, everyone. Today's topic is the Vertex Pharmaceuticals case study. I did not want to overlook this in this week's class. There's a lot of key learning points that I think we need to all gather from in terms of how do you decide how to proceed with a piece of technology. And let's assume for the moment that that technology is some IP in the pharmaceutical space, presumably leading to a new molecule that might be eventually brought to market as a drug. So if we start with that framework, some of the factors to consider when you're looking at such a piece of technology is what's the net present value. In project management, we're going to be looking at this as risk adjusted, meaning looking at all the failure potentials along the way. Each clinical phase has, in essence, a risk of failure. We have an understanding of what those risks are historically, so we can take that and mathematically derive what's the risk-adjusted net present value, meaning factoring in all of the potentials for failure at each stage along the way, which means either a resubmission to the FDA or a possible termination of the project. So all of those need to be factored in what we would call a decision tree. So that decision tree can be collapsed along with the various payouts along the way. Payouts will be represented as reductions of risk, which is increased valuation. So as you go from left to right in the progression of this technology, the value of the technology increases because you're technically de-risking that technology. You're taking risk out, which makes it more valuable, right? So as it passes certain tests, completes certain phases of clinical trials, as you pour more money into the R&D, by its very nature, that technology will improve in terms of valuation. So factors to consider: risk of failure, of course. These are incremental risks throughout, as well as the market risk at the end. So you could, in many cases, build something or create something that nobody wants. In the case of pharmaceuticals, if the drug does not make it into the formulary, if it has not become the new standard of care, if for whatever reason insurance companies refuse to reimburse, these are all recipes for failure on the market side, meaning adoption, right? There's also obviously technology risks throughout development where it could literally fail to be efficacious or safe for the patients, and that would fall out of the various clinical trial phases. Competition, and this is something that each team needs to look at throughout the course of the project, which means who else is coming out to basically address this disease, what other technologies are going to be in the market or are already in the market, or other solutions that may not be that technologically oriented. So what is the competition and how will that erode your market share? So fundamentally, you need to assess what market share your new drug will garner and what it will capture in the marketplace, right? So that includes other drugs in the pipeline. You need to look at your own drug pipeline within, in this case, the Pfizer pipeline or other pipelines across the industry. These are pretty well published, and you'll find lots of financial reports and analyses that look at pipeline analysis in the pharmaceutical industry. So you'll be able to see who's who in the zoo, how far along they are, when they're ready to, or expected to be ready to launch, and what kind of market share they might be capturing. What stage of development are you at? So early stage is going to have lower value. Later stage will have higher value. Early stage has higher risks, which means it has lower value. So what stage are you at? This is all obtainable information through the FDA websites, as well as in the case of Pfizer, their own website that usually gets updated pretty quickly. You can also check out analyst reports that look at the pipeline analysis to see how far along they are. But generally speaking, you want to know how much risk has been taken out of the technology, and therefore get a better sense of the valuation. Expertise needed. This might require an expertise that's not indigenous to your company. We'll talk about some of those options later on in this presentation. But generally speaking, if the technology you're pursuing requires expertise your company doesn't have, you're going to have to work with partners, outsource, or shelve the technology or somehow defer it. And of course, lastly is organizational capacity, right? You could have too many products in the pipeline beyond your capacity to deliver. You'll see this as delays. Delays not necessarily in approvals, but in submissions, right? So if you can't get the drug submitted for that phase, it's often because of either technical issues or capacity issues, right? So try to assess, and this is not going to be easy because most companies are not open about their capacity constraints. But you can infer capacity constraints from behavior, right? So late submissions, late responses to the FDA, delays, schedule delays in certain products as opposed to others. And that's usually reflecting organizational capacity issues. What are your options for developing these new technologies? So obviously the first thing you can do, and the simplest thing, the lowest risk thing, is to license the patent to those who can take it to market. So in the worst case, you have no capacity, or you have no expertise, or you have no desire to pursue a technology or a market. And it could be one or the other, or both. You might say, look, we're not interested in the European market or the Asian market, or we're not interested in this application. So in that case, you license it to those who do. You get a royalty stream coming from that that's quasi-risk-free in the extent that you need to specify specifically what your expectations are for timeliness in terms of going to market, what markets you're going to serve, et cetera, so that it wins on both sides, right? The licensee and the licensor both feel like they've got a victory here. You have the option of holding the technology as a backup, meaning you might have primary approaches to certain disease categories, and this technology might be seen as secondary to those primary approaches. So the backup means in the event that the first one fails, you have a second bite at the apple, so to speak. You can partner with an organization that has deep pockets, right? Those who might be able or willing to subsidize or fund or resource your project, right? So they've got the deep pockets where maybe as a startup you don't. You can outsource the development so that if you don't have the capacity, but you do have the dollars, maybe you go to a low-cost CRO, contract research organization. These folks can conduct your clinical trials, your tests, your R&D, and effectively offload it from your capacity charts. But it's still going to take management, it's still going to take dollars, and it's still going to take time and effort. So in some cases, CROs are faster. In some cases, many cases, CROs are cheaper. So that could be part of the motivation. The other part is the CRO might be physically located in the market you're trying to serve, which means that they have access to the people needed for the clinical studies. Why else would you use a CRO? Simply because you want to move faster to market and you don't have the ability to do it, right? Lastly, you can always develop the technology internally, and that seems to be the default, but also recognize it's one of the highest risk things you can do. You have all the various costs that go with it. Usually you're in a high cost center. There's also the risks of failure. There's also all the things that you could have been doing, the other optional technologies you could have been pursuing. So there's all of these trade-offs that need to be looked at, but certainly that's an option as well, as long as you've evaluated all the others thoroughly. I'd like to see that you've made a good case one way or the other, right? So licensing is a great approach to generate risk-free revenue, right? It guarantees effectively a no-loss scenario, meaning that you're not putting any money into it, at least not future money. So therefore, you have really nothing to lose except the opportunity to pursue this somewhere else, license it to others that are more vibrant or more capable, right? It does not, however, guarantee revenue. It doesn't guarantee the minimum thresholds you might want as part of your business plan. It can be used strategically to buy time or assign a technology to some dormant or undesired market or application based on your roadmap preferences. So a great example would be, I'm not ready for the Asian market, but I'm ready for the US market. I'll license this technology for Asia to some company X for the next 5 to 10 years. By then, we should be ready for Asia, and we should have the ability, the resources, the financing, and the desire to go into that market. So get some revenue out of that. Of course, there's always risks that when you license to somebody, that somehow when the license is expired, they can somehow stay in the market and maybe change the formulation just enough to get past any patent concerns. Obviously, this depends on the location of the market, the application of the technology, right? But this is a viable option to keep, especially a startup, cash flow positive, keep the cash coming in while deferring certain markets and focusing your energies on others. Hold the technology, meaning shelve it for some time. And the reason you would do that is if there's no competition, there's really very little, I guess there's always an opportunity cost in terms of the market you could have had. But if the opportunity costs are higher in other products or other technologies, you might want to put your energies there. This may work if the patents can be extended using innovative enhancements. In other words, if you're ready to expire a patent, you can usually make an enhancement to it or an innovation that allows you to restart the clock, so to speak, right? This can be an issue if the experts in your organization become disillusioned, they bolt, or they just become unproductive. So yes, that should be taken into account, but I don't think that should be the sole criteria. You have a business to run. Some of these experts might very well leave. And, frankly, if you're not ready for the technology, maybe it's best if they do leave. So I know that's a brutal way of thinking about it, but if you can't put those experts to good use, if they're not going to be happy with your decisions, they might have to take an exit. It's not recommended for long periods of time because obviously the patents do expire in a finite, usually 20-year period. So it may not make sense to do this for the long term, but maybe for some short-term expediency or, frankly, there's two other reasons too I didn't put on this chart. One of them is the market's not ready for the technology, right? And then the other one is the technology is not ready for the market. And both of those are things that you probably need to deal with internally to either develop the technology to make it ready or to somehow either observe the market or persuade the market to become ready for the technology, right? We've seen electric vehicles take, 10, 15 years. The first EVs, back 22 years ago with EV1, GM, some would say we were ready, and some would say, look, we're still not ready. Sales of EVs are still very, very low, right? So partnering. This is usually works well when you have complementary interests with the partner, or you've got complementary capabilities or goals, right? So usually it's the capabilities that drive it, and then the goals and interests usually align with that. Works when you have some negotiating leverage. In other words, do you have something that makes you attractive to the partner? Works with credible and reputable partners. You don't want somebody who's a newbie necessarily, because that can be considered pretty high risk. Need to protect your IP carefully so it doesn't become your partner's IP. Need to make sure this doesn't become an orphan project, meaning you've got a team assigned on your side, they've got a team assigned on the partner side, but that's not the best team from either side, and it becomes neglected, and you could use the word orphaned. Orphan meaning you don't have the best people working on it, and it's not going to make the best progress on either side. Lastly, there's also this subject of internal self-sabotage, and I've seen this happen. I haven't seen it written up too much in the journals, but organizations have these kind of antibodies that attack new projects, especially ones that are exogenous, ones that are not developed from within. So because of that, it's going to have more antibodies, more rejection from the host company, and it'll be set up to fail. And I'm sure you can come up with examples all over the place of businesses and products and technologies that were internally set up to fail. All right, the last one I guess we can mention is, again, outsourcing to a CRO. It can result in loss of control. You're reliant on the processes and controls of the CRO. It's hard to prioritize third parties, get their interests, get their resources, get their attention. I would recommend you pick a CRO where you will get the priority you need. So match your size company with the size CRO. A really big CRO working with a small company probably won't get you the attention you need, and vice versa. You probably wouldn't have the skills that you need, right? Need to keep the CRO motivated. So write the contracts, write the terms and conditions in a way that keeps both sides engaged and keeps them both focused on the business. And often this is done due to resource constraints, either that or to reduce costs or to buy time. So this is why you do it, and when you do it. I guess ultimately how you do it is a function of your outsource management and your ability to manage subcontracts. So with that, I think that covers the case. And I also think it covers this whole topic of strategy applied to technology. I will see you in class.